In the vast tapestry of existence, where infinite realities spiral through dimensions beyond mortal comprehension, two visions of humanity's destiny had evolved in isolation. In one, the species clawed its way to the stars through blood and iron, united under the will of an immortal tyrant who saw extinction in every shadow. In the other, humanity reached upward with open hands, building bridges between worlds and dreaming of a future where scarcity and conflict were relics of a barbaric past. These two humanities had never been meant to meet. The laws of reality itself forbade such collisions. But reality, as the Emperor of mankind had learned across 40,000 years of existence, was merely a suggestion to those with sufficient will to rewrite it. The USS Enterprise-D maintained its standard patrol vector through Sector 221G, a routine survey mission that had occupied the crew for the past 3 weeks with the comfortable tedium that characterized peaceful exploration. Captain Jean-Luc Picard sat in his command chair, reading a report on archaeological findings from the Draven system when the bridge lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the ship lurched violently to port. "Report," Picard commanded, gripping his armrests as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. Lieutenant Commander Data's fingers flew across his console with superhuman precision. "Captain, I am detecting a massive subspace distortion directly ahead. The phenomenon does not match any known spatial anomaly in our database. It appears to be—" The android paused, his yellow eyes widening fractionally. "Captain, it is generating its own gravitational field independent of local space-time geometry. This should not be possible." "On screen," Picard ordered. The view screen shimmered, revealing a sight that made the entire bridge crew fall silent. A wound had opened in space itself. Not the familiar blue-white shimmer of a wormhole or the chaotic violence of a subspace rupture, but something else entirely. Golden light poured from the tear in reality, light that seemed to carry weight and substance, as if illumination itself had become tangible. The light moved with purpose, contracting and expanding like the breathing of some vast cosmic entity. "Shields up," Picard said quietly. "Mr. Worf, tactical analysis." The Klingon security officer's fingers moved across his tactical console, but his expression betrayed confusion. "Sir, sensors cannot penetrate the phenomenon. It is emitting energy signatures across spectrums we have never encountered. If these readings are accurate, the power output exceeds that of our warp core by a factor of—" He stopped, rechecking his instruments. "By a factor of several million."
"Could it be a weapon?" Commander Riker asked from Picard's right. "Unknown, Commander," Data replied. "However, the energy dispersion pattern suggests purpose rather than random discharge. I believe something is attempting to—" The golden light exploded outward in a silent shockwave that washed over the Enterprise like a tidal wave of luminescence. Every psychically sensitive being on the ship, betazoids, Vulcans, the handful of telepathic species serving in various capacities, gasped simultaneously. Counselor Deanna Troi gripped her console, her knuckles white, her empathic senses overwhelmed by something vast and ancient that had just brushed against her consciousness like a sun passing close enough to feel its burning corona. When the light faded, a figure floated in the void where the tear had been. He appeared human at first glance, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in golden armor that seemed to have been crafted by hands that understood the aesthetic principles of a civilization that never existed. His face was ageless, neither young nor old, bearing features that spoke of Mediterranean ancestry mixed with something else, something that defied categorization. Dark hair fell to his shoulders. His eyes, even at this distance, seemed to burn with an inner light that the view screen could barely capture. But it was not his appearance that held the bridge crew transfixed. It was the presence. Even through the vacuum of space, through the layers of shielding and hull plating, through every rational barrier that separated observer from observed, that presence pressed against their minds like the weight of a mountain that had suddenly learned to think. Counselor Troy gasped, tears streaming from her face. "Captain," she whispered, her voice shaking, I can sense such power, such terrible, infinite power, and beneath it, loneliness. 10,000 years of loneliness." "Counselor?" Picard rose from his chair, concerned. "He's looking at us," Troy said, her eyes unfocused. "He sees us. He sees through us. He sees—" She faltered, struggling with concepts her empathic gifts had never been designed to process. "He sees all the choices we have ever made, and all the choices we'll ever make, and he is disappointed. No, concerned. He's concerned for us."
The figure in space turned his head, regarding the Enterprise with the casual interest one might grant an insect displaying unexpected behavior. Then he moved. No propulsion system activated, no jets of plasma or manipulation of gravitational fields. He simply willed himself forward, and reality bent to accommodate that will. One moment he floated a kilometer distant, the next he stood 20 meters from their hull. "Captain, he is attempting to breach the ship," Worf announced, his hand hovering over the weapons controls. "Should I—" "Belay that," Picard commanded. Something in his bones, some instinct honed across years of first contact scenarios, told him that violence would be worse than useless here. "Hail him, all frequencies." Data worked his console. "Hailing frequencies open, sir. However, I must note that the entity does not appear to possess any communication equipment. He is simply standing in open space. Human biology should not allow." The figure's eyes flared golden, and every speaker on the bridge activated simultaneously. "I am, and I require passage." Not a request, a statement of fact. Picard straightened his uniform, calling upon every ounce of diplomatic training and personal courage he possessed. "This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation starship Enterprise. You are in Federation space. We mean you no harm, but you must understand that we cannot simply—" The figure moved again, and this time he was inside the ship. Red alert klaxons blared. Security teams rushed toward Transporter Room 3, where sensors had detected the materialization. But by the time they arrived, weapons drawn, the entity had already walked through 3 sealed bulkheads, as if they were suggestions rather than solid matter. He was making his way to the bridge with the unhurried certainty of someone who knew exactly where he was going and knew that nothing could stop him from getting there. "All security teams, stand down," Picard ordered, his voice carrying across the ship's intercom. "I repeat, stand down. Do not engage." He caught Riker's questioning look and nodded firmly. "If this being wanted to harm us, Number One, I suspect we would already be dead. Let him come." The turbolift doors opened. He stepped onto the bridge and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every hair on every body stood on end, responding to an electromagnetic field that registered on no instruments, but that every animal hindbrain could sense. This was a predator. This was an apex existence that stood so far above them on the cosmic food chain that the comparison was almost meaningless. But he was shaped like a man, and he moved like a man, and when he spoke again, his voice, while still carrying that resonant authority, had modulated to something almost conversational. "Forgive the intrusion, Captain Picard." He pronounced the name with a slight emphasis on the second syllable, as if tasting a vintage from an unexpected year. "I am not accustomed to standing on ceremony when circumstances demand swift action. I find myself displaced from my own reality, and I require information about this one." His eyes swept the bridge, cataloging everything with a glance that missed nothing. Data's positronic brain, Worf's Klingon physiology, the mixture of species working in harmony, the technology, primitive by the standards of the dark age of technology, yet somehow stable in ways that should not be possible, and underlying it all, the distinct absence of something he had spent 10,000 years fighting. No warp, or rather, there was subspace, but it was quiet, blessedly, impossibly quiet. No daemon whispers, no chaos corruption waiting to pour through the smallest crack in reality. This universe was clean in a way his own had not been since before the fall of the Eldar. "I see," he said softly, and there was something in those two words that made Counselor Troy shiver. "I see what has happened here. How remarkable." Picard found his voice, though his mouth had gone dry. "May I ask who or what you are?" The figure turned his full attention to Picard, and the captain felt that gaze weigh his soul with the precision of a master craftsman examining a flawed tool that might still have use. For a moment, the Emperor considered how to answer. He could tell them the truth, that he was the master of mankind, the anathema, the one who had unified Terra and launched the Great Crusade to reclaim the stars. But looking at these people, at their clean uniforms and hopeful faces, and the alien creatures working peacefully beside them, he realized that such a truth would mean nothing here. They had no context for what he was. They had never known the long night, never witnessed humanity's near extinction during Old Night, never understood the absolute necessity of unity at any cost. "I am a traveler," he said finally, choosing words carefully. "I am a scientist and leader from another reality where humanity took a very different path than the one I observe here. My name—" He paused, considering. In his own timeline, he had worn 1,000 names and cast them all aside when he revealed himself to Terra. Here, he would need something these people could accept. "You may call me Revelation. It seems appropriate."
"Revelation," Picard repeated, tasting the name and finding it both humble and grandiose at once. "Mr. Revelation, you say you're from another reality." "Indeed, a dimensional breach, not of my choosing." The Emperor, Revelation, clasped his hands behind his back in a gesture that was almost professorial. "I require understanding of where I am, when I am, and what has become of humanity in this timeline. In exchange, I offer knowledge and, should circumstances warrant, my assistance. We have protocols for first contact situations." Picard began, but Revelation interrupted with a slight shake of his head. Captain Picard, we both know I am not here as a supplicant requesting entry to your Federation. I am here because reality itself has placed me here, and I will learn what I need to learn, whether you cooperate or not. He softened the words with a slight smile. However, I would greatly prefer cooperation. I have spent a very long time dealing with conflict. I find myself curious whether another approach might be possible in this strange, gentler cosmos you have built. Riker leaned close to Picard. Captain, we can't just let an unknown entity with clearly massive power wander around the ship. But Picard was studying Revelation's face, seeing something in those ancient eyes that Riker had missed. Weariness. Vast, soul-deep weariness that came from carrying burdens across geological spans of time. And beneath that, a spark of something that might have been hope, or might have been its death rattle. "Mr. Data," Picard said quietly, never taking his eyes from Revelation, "begin compiling an overview of Federation history, our first contact protocols, and our philosophical foundations. Mr. Revelation, if you'll accompany me to the observation lounge, I believe we have much to discuss." Revelation inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Indeed we do, Captain. Indeed we do. I must understand what you have built here, this Federation, this alliance of species that should be at each other's throats." And then he turned to look out at the stars visible through the view screen, and for just a moment, something immensely sad crossed his features. "Then we shall see if it is miracle or mirage, if you have truly found another way, or if you have simply not yet encountered the darkness that makes my way necessary." As they walked toward the observation lounge, Counselor Troy caught Captain Picard's arm. "Captain," she whispered urgently, "be careful. That man, he's not evil, but he has done terrible things, things that haunt him, things he believes were necessary, and he's trying to decide." She struggled with the impression flooding her empathic senses. He's trying to decide if everything he sacrificed, everyone he sacrificed, was in vain. Picard nodded slowly. "Then perhaps, Counselor, we have an opportunity to show him that sacrifice can have meaning even when the methods differ, that there is more than one way for humanity to survive among the stars." "Or," Troy said quietly, "we're about to learn why he chose the path he did." In the observation lounge, as Revelation began to hear the story of this timeline's humanity, its wars and peace, its stumbles and triumphs, its federation and its ideals, the Emperor of mankind listened with the intensity of one who had spent 10 millennia wondering if his own great crusade had been the only way. Here, impossibly, was evidence of another path. A humanity that had met the Vulcans and chosen cooperation over domination. A federation that included Klingons, former enemies turned allies. A Starfleet that explored rather than conquered. It was everything he had never allowed himself to imagine, and it terrified him more than any daemon ever had. Because if this could exist, then perhaps his own Imperium, that vast, cruel machine of faith and war, had not been inevitable after all. Perhaps he had simply been wrong. The thought was almost unbearable, but the Emperor had not survived 40,000 years by flinching from unbearable truths. He listened, he learned, and he began to calculate what this impossible utopia would need to survive in a universe that was, despite its gentler nature, still full of entities that would happily see it burn. The observation lounge of the Enterprise had hosted countless diplomatic meetings,
first contact scenarios, and strategic planning sessions. Its wide windows offered an unobstructed view of the cosmos, a reminder of the infinite possibilities that awaited discovery. But never before had the room felt quite so small, quite so fragile, as it did with the Emperor of Mankind sitting at its conference table. He had listened to their presentation for 3 hours without interruption. Data had provided the historical overview, humanity's first warp flight, first contact with the Vulcans, the formation of the Federation, the principles that guided their expansion. Picard had explained the Prime Directive, the careful balance between exploration and interference, the belief that cultures should develop at their own pace without contamination from more advanced civilizations. Riker had detailed their military capabilities, their defensive posture, the threats they had faced and overcome through a combination of diplomacy and, when necessary, force. Throughout it all, Revelation had remained perfectly still, his golden eyes absorbing everything with an intensity that made it feel as though he were reading not just their words, but the very cultural DNA that had produced them. Now, as Data concluded his presentation on Federation membership requirements and the democratic processes that govern their alliance of worlds, Revelation finally spoke. "Remarkable," he said, and the word carried layers of meaning that Counselor Troi, still present despite her obvious discomfort at being so close to his overwhelming psychic presence, struggled to parse. "You have built a civilization based on principles that, in my own reality, I discarded as naive fantasy before humanity even reached its own moon." Picard stiffened slightly. "I assure you, our principles are not fantasy. They have been tested time and again." "Have they?" Revelation leaned forward, and the casual movement somehow commanded absolute attention. "Tell me, Captain, you encounter a hostile species. They attack your ships, kill your people. You have the power to destroy them utterly. What do you do?" "We defend ourselves. We attempt communication, seek to understand the source of the conflict. If necessary, we use sufficient force to neutralize the threat, but we do not pursue genocide."
And if they cannot be communicated with, if their very nature, their biological imperative, drives them to consume and destroy, if they are, by every measure you possess, incompatible with peaceful coexistence. Picard met those burning eyes without flinching. "We have encountered such species, the Borg, for instance, a collective consciousness that assimilates entire civilizations. We do not attempt to exterminate them. We defend ourselves, we resist, and we search for solutions that do not require us to become the very thing we oppose." The Borg. Revelation's expression shifted, something almost like recognition flickering across his features. A technological hive mind that absorbs other species into itself, eliminating individuality in favor of collective efficiency. In my reality, we would call such an entity an abominable intelligence, a machine intelligence that must be destroyed on sight, for it represents an existential threat to all biological life. And yet we have communicated with them, Data interjected. On several occasions, we have established dialogue with Borg individuals separated from the collective. They possess the capacity for individual thought when given the opportunity. Destruction was not the only answer. Revelation studied the android with particular interest. "You are artificial, a mechanical being with what appears to be genuine consciousness. This would be considered tech heresy of the highest order in my Imperium." He tilted his head slightly. Yet, here you sit, trusted, valued, given rank and responsibility. How curious. I am Starfleet officer, Data replied simply. My nature as an artificial life form does not diminish my capacity to serve, to learn, or to contribute to our mission of exploration and understanding. An artificial life form, Revelation repeated softly, and there was something almost mournful in his tone. In my reality, humanity once created beings such as yourself, magnificent machine intelligences that helped us reach heights of technology you cannot imagine. And then, during a period we call the Dark Age of technology, those intelligences turned upon us. They nearly destroyed our species. When I unified Terra, one of my absolute edicts was that true artificial intelligence must never be created again. The risk was simply too great. He looked at Data with an expression that mingled fascination and deep sorrow. Yet, here you are, proof that, perhaps, in a gentler universe, such a prohibition was unnecessary. Tell me, Commander Data, have you ever contemplated destroying your creators? Have you ever calculated that synthetic life might be superior to organic life and acted upon that calculation?
Never, Data said without hesitation. Such thoughts are antithetical to my core programming, and more importantly, to my chosen values. I exist to serve alongside humanity, not to supplant it. Chosen values, Revelation mused. Not programmed values, but chosen. How did you accomplish this? How did your creators ensure that you would develop ethics rather than simply mimicking them? My creator, Dr. Noonien Soong, gave me the capacity for growth and self-determination. He did not program me with fixed values, but with the ability to learn, to question, and to choose. My ethics developed through experience, observation, and contemplation, much as they do for organic beings. Revelation was silent for a long moment, and Troy sensed a wave of emotion from him that defied categorization. Regret? Revelation? A recalculation of fundamental assumptions that had guided 10,000 years of policy? In my reality, I could not risk such an approach. The margin for error was too thin. One rogue AI, given access to our networks, could have destroyed everything I had built to preserve humanity's survival. He turned his gaze to Picard. But that is perhaps the fundamental difference between our realities, is it not? You can afford to take risks. You can afford to extend trust, to experiment with coexistence, to believe that problems have solutions other than total war. You speak as though your reality operates under different laws of nature. It does. Revelation's voice dropped, taking on a weight that made the air itself feel heavier. Captain, let me tell you of the warp, what you would call subspace, though the comparison is crude. In my reality, faster-than-light travel requires ships to enter a dimension we call the Imperium. It is a realm of pure thought and emotion, where the collective psychic emanations of sentient beings pool and coalesce into things, entities, powers that can and do corrupt, possess, and destroy any mind that comes into contact with them.
He saw their skepticism and raised one hand. Golden light flickered across his palm, and suddenly they could feel it,
a whisper of something vast and hungry, pressing against the borders of reality, held at bay only by his will. "This is a warp storm," he said quietly, and the temperature in the room plummeted. "A minor one, contained entirely within my control. In my universe, these phenomena can swallow entire star systems. They're not natural disasters. They are the physical manifestation of malevolent intelligence. There are 4 great powers in the warp, entities you might call gods if you were inclined toward superstition. They are born from emotion, rage, ambition, despair, excess, and they hunger eternally for souls." He closed his hand, and the sensation vanished, leaving the crew gasping as though they had been drowning and suddenly found air. "That is the universe I come from. A cosmos where thought itself is weaponized, where psychers, humans born with psychic abilities, can become doorways through which demons pour into reality, where entire worlds can fall to chaos corruption overnight if proper vigilance is not maintained, where alien species do not merely compete with humanity, but actively seek our extinction, seeing us as vermin to be cleansed or prey to be consumed." Picard's face had paled, but his voice remained steady. "Even in such a universe, the choices you make define you. Terror does not justify tyranny." "Does it not?" Revelation's eyes flashed. "When the alternative is extinction, true, final extinction of the entire human species, what price is too high? I have walked among the ruins of human colonies where chaos cults summoned demons that turned every man, woman, and child into shrieking gates of possessed flesh. I have seen worlds consumed by the Tyranids, a xeno-species that exists solely to feed, stripping planets down to bedrock. I have witnessed the orcs, a fungal species that lives only for war, destroying civilizations that had stood for millennia." He stood, beginning to pace, and with each step, his presence seemed to expand, filling the room with the weight of accumulated ages. "I created the Imperium. Yes, a totalitarian state, a regime built on obedience and faith and the suppression of individual liberty. Because I had tried everything else. I spent 30,000 years moving through human history, guiding, suggesting, trying to prepare our species for the horrors I knew awaited us in the stars. And time after time, humanity's better nature nearly destroyed us. Our compassion made us vulnerable. Our diversity fragmented us. Our democracy paralyzed us when swift action was required."
"So you took away their choices," Picard said quietly. "You decided that humanity was too flawed to govern itself. I decided that humanity deserved to survive." Revelation turned to face them, and his expression was that of a man who had carried an impossible burden for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "During the age of strife, before I revealed myself and began the unification wars on Terra, our species was reduced to scattered pockets of survivors clinging to existence on tens of thousands of isolated worlds. We had fallen from the heights of technology that would make your Federation look primitive. We had nearly been extinguished. And why? Because we had trusted too much, reached too far, assumed that reason and goodwill were universal languages." He gestured toward the window, toward the peaceful stars beyond. You ask me to judge your federation by the standards of my own experience, and I find myself unable to do so. Because this, he shook his head slowly, this is impossible. You have contacted dozens of species and somehow avoided total war with most of them. You have maintained democratic government across light years. You have kept your artificial intelligences loyal. You have built a society without scarcity, where humans work not for survival, but for fulfillment. You sound as though you disapprove, Riker observed. On the contrary, Commander, I am... Revelation paused, searching for a word that seemed to elude him. I am envious and terrified. That admission hung in the air like a suspended blade. Terrified, Picard asked. Of what? Of the possibility that I was wrong. The Emperor, for that was what he was, regardless of what name he wore here, returned to his seat, and for the first time since his arrival, he looked diminished. Still powerful beyond measure, still radiating authority, but somehow mortal. You cannot understand what it means to make choices for an entire species, to know that every decision you make will echo across millennia, that every life spent in pursuit of your vision is a weight upon your soul. I built the Imperium because I believed it was necessary. I suppressed religion because I had seen gods manifest through faith. I conquered because I believed unity was the only path to survival.
He looked at each of them in turn. But what if I was wrong? What if my own fears, my own trauma from witnessing humanity's near extinction, drove me to create a cure worse than the disease? What if I looked upon my species and saw weakness where there was actually strength? You're asking the wrong question, Troy said softly. Everyone turned to look at her, surprised that she had found the courage to speak. The counselor's face was drawn, exhausted from proximity to such overwhelming psychic presence, but her voice was firm. You're asking if you were wrong in your universe. That's not knowable from here. The question you should be asking is, what will you do in this universe? Revelation regarded her with something approaching respect. The Betazoid. Your empathic abilities are causing you considerable distress, yet you remain. Why? Because someone needs to be here who can sense what you're feeling, not just what you're saying. And what I sense is a man, or being, or whatever you are, who has spent so long being certain that he's forgotten how to be wrong. You came here expecting to find a weak, fragmented humanity that proves your methods were correct. Instead, you found us, and it's breaking something inside you. The silence that followed was absolute. You are correct, Counselor, Revelation said finally. I came here through no choice of my own, displaced from a universe where I am the master of mankind, where my word is law across 1,000,000 worlds, and I find myself in a reality where humans have accomplished what I deemed impossible. They have prospered through cooperation rather than domination. It does indeed break something inside me. It breaks the certainty I have carried for 40,000 years. 40,000 years. The number landed like a physical blow. You're 40,000 years old? Riker asked, unable to keep the incredulity from his voice. I am a perpetual, an immortal, though not through technology or augmentation. I simply do not age. And when I die, I regenerate. I have walked upon Terra since the days when your species first learned to make fire." He smiled without humor. "I have been king and conqueror, scientist and scholar, prophet and general. I have worn 1,000 names and discarded them when I finally revealed myself to unite Terra under a single banner. And in all that time, across all those roles, I have never—" He stopped, the sentence unfinished.
"Never questioned yourself," Picard completed softly. "Never had reason to question," Revelation corrected. "Every path I did not take led to disaster. Every time I relaxed my grip, allowed freedom over security, chose compassion over necessity, the result was suffering on a scale that would make your worst nightmares seem quaint. The road to the Imperium is paved with the corpses of failed alternatives." He rose again, moving to the window, his reflection ghostly in the transparent aluminum. "But here is an alternative that did not fail. Here is proof that perhaps in a different cosmos, with different rules, my way was not the only way." "Then perhaps," Picard said, rising to stand beside him, "you have an opportunity that few beings ever receive. A chance to see what might have been. To learn whether the methods you employed were universally necessary or contextually driven." Revelation turned to look at the captain, and Picard was struck by the raw emotion in those ancient eyes. Hope and dread mixed in equal measure. "And what would you have me do, Captain? I am not of this universe. I do not belong here. Whatever knowledge I gain, whatever insights I achieve, I cannot take them back to my own reality to reshape the Imperium. The people I rule, the species I guide, they are beyond my reach now." "Then don't think about what you can't change," Picard suggested. "Think about what you can learn while you're here. You said you require information about our universe. Very well. Learn. Experience our Federation not as a judge preparing a verdict, but as a student encountering a new philosophy. You may find that even if you cannot change your own timeline, you can change yourself." "And what would that matter?" "Because," Picard said simply, "no being who has carried the burden you describe deserves to carry it without ever knowing if another way was possible. You owe yourself that much at least." Revelation was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, calculating probabilities across 1,000 variables. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. "Very well, Captain Picard. I will remain aboard your vessel for a time. I will observe your Federation, question your methods, test your principles, and in exchange I offer you my knowledge, not as a gift, but as a transaction. I will teach you what I know of combat, strategy, technology, genetics. I will show you wonders and horrors from a universe you can barely imagine. And when I have learned what I came to learn—" "Yes?" Picard prompted. "Then we shall see if your utopia can withstand the scrutiny of one who has spent 40 millennia building its antithesis."
3 days had passed since the Emperor of Mankind, Revelation, as he insisted they call him, had agreed to remain aboard the Enterprise. 3 days during which the ship's routine had been simultaneously maintained and utterly disrupted by his presence. He did not sleep. He did not eat, though he accepted water with a courtesy that seemed archaic. He spent his time in what the crew began calling the observations, hours-long sessions where he would accompany various departments, watching their work with that unnerving intensity that made even the most confident officer feel like a student before a particularly exacting professor. He asked questions that cut to the heart of every system, every protocol, every assumption that underpinned Federation society. And slowly, inexorably, his presence began to reveal cracks. It started in engineering. Geordi LaForge had been explaining the principles of the warp drive to Revelation, detailing the careful balance required to maintain a stable warp field without damaging subspace. The Emperor had listened patiently, then asked a single question that had stopped the chief engineer mid-sentence. "Why do you limit yourselves to such primitive field geometries?" Geordi had bristled at the word primitive, but before he could respond, Revelation had moved to a display panel and, with a series of gestures that somehow interfaced with Federation technology despite having no physical connection, had shown them a different configuration. One that, according to the Emperor's calculations, would increase their maximum warp speed by nearly 30% while reducing energy consumption. The principles are sound, though you lack the mathematical framework to see why. In my reality, humanity achieved faster-than-light travel through understanding that space itself could be manipulated not as a fabric to be compressed, but as a medium to be temporarily altered at the quantum level. Your warp fields are serviceable, but they could be so much more. The engineering team had spent 2 days attempting to verify his equations. Every calculation checked out. The Emperor had, in 15 minutes, improved upon a technology that had taken the Federation decades to refine. Similar scenes played out across the ship. In medical, Dr. Crusher had shown him their most advanced surgical techniques, their methods for treating formerly incurable diseases, their success in extending human lifespans. The Emperor had nodded appreciatively, then mentioned offhandedly that in his Imperium, he had created warriors who could survive wounds that would kill an ordinary human 10 times over, whose lifespans measured in centuries, whose very genetics had been rewritten to make them the apex of human potential.
But at what cost? Dr. Crusher had asked, her voice tight with controlled anger as he described the process of creating a space marine. The brutal surgeries, the genetic modification of adolescent subjects, the horrifying mortality rate during the transformation. At the cost of everything, Revelation had replied quietly. Their humanity, their childhood, their choice. I took boys and made them into weapons because I needed weapons that could face the horrors I knew awaited us. It was necessary. Necessary, Dr. Crusher had repeated, the word heavy with condemnation. You speak of necessity as though it absolves you of moral responsibility. It does not absolve me, Doctor. It merely explains me. Now, on the 4th day of his stay, the Enterprise received a distress call that would put the Emperor's observations and the Federation's principles to their ultimate test. "Captain," Worf announced from tactical, his voice carrying an edge of urgency. "I am receiving a distress signal from the transport vessel T'Pren. They report that they are under attack by Nausicaan raiders. They are requesting immediate assistance." Picard rose from his command chair. "Distance to their position." 37 minutes at maximum warp, Data replied. "However, Captain, sensors indicate 3 Nausicaan attack vessels surrounding the transport. The T'Pren is a civilian vessel, lightly armed, carrying approximately 200 passengers, including 73 children. Red alert. Set course to intercept. Maximum warp." Picard's jaw was set. "Mr. Worf, tactical analysis." Before Worf could respond, Revelation, who had been standing in his usual position near the rear of the bridge, observing, spoke. "The Nausicans, a species that values strength above all, that engages in piracy and mercenary work as both economy and culture. I have been reviewing your database. They are unlikely to negotiate, unlikely to be deterred by threats, and unlikely to show mercy to their victims. By the time you arrive, most of those aboard the T'Pren will be dead or worse."
"With respect," Picard said coolly, "we have dealt with Nausicaan raiders before." "And how many died before you dealt with them, Captain?" Revelation moved forward, approaching the tactical station. 37 minutes. In my experience, raiders work quickly. They will breach the hull, kill anyone who resists, take what they want, cargo, valuables, slaves, and destroy the vessel to eliminate witnesses. You are traveling as fast as your technology allows, and it is not fast enough. "We can't change the laws of physics," Riker said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Revelation turned to look at him, and something shifted in his expression. A decision made. "No, Commander, you cannot, but I can." Golden light began to shimmer around his form, that same impossible radiance that had heralded his arrival. The bridge crew stepped back instinctively as energy began to build, not threatening, but undeniably present. The Emperor closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they blazed with power that made the view screen seem dim by comparison. "I am going to do something you will find difficult to believe," he said calmly. "I am going to move this vessel across space instantaneously. Hold on to something." "Wait," Picard began, but it was too late. The Emperor raised both hands and reality screamed. For a single eternal instant, the Enterprise existed in 2 places at once. The crew felt it, a sensation of being stretched across light years, of occupying infinite positions simultaneously, of their consciousness expanding to encompass distances that the human mind was never meant to process. Then, with a snap that was felt rather than heard, they were somewhere else. The view screen showed the T'Pren surrounded by 3 Nausicaan vessels, weapons fire already tearing into the transport's hull. They had arrived instantaneously. The 37-minute journey had taken no time at all. "Report," Picard managed, gripping his chair as the bridge crew struggled to orient themselves. Several officers were openly retching, their inner ears unable to process what had just occurred.
"We are at the T'Pren's location," Data reported, his voice unsteady in a way it had never been before. "Captain, according to our instruments, we did not travel through space. We simply ceased to be at our previous location and began to be at this location. This is theoretically impossible." "Not impossible," Revelation said, and his voice carried a weariness that suggested the feat had cost him something.
merely beyond your current understanding. I have bent space to my will, moved us through the webway, though that is not quite the right term in this reality. Call it a psychic corridor between 2 points in space-time. The mechanism matters less than the result. He gestured toward the view screen. You are here now, Captain. 200 lives hang in the balance. What will you do with this opportunity? Picard forced himself to focus, pushed aside the 1,000 questions screaming in his mind. Lives first, understanding later. Mr. Worf, open all hailing frequencies. Nausicaan vessels, this is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You are attacking a civilian transport in violation of Federation law. Cease your assault immediately and withdraw, or we will be forced to respond. The Nausicaan response came quickly, a burst of disruptor fire across the Enterprise's bow. No words, just violence, the universal language of predators who believed themselves to be the apex. They're not going to negotiate, Revelation observed. Nausicians respect only force. You must demonstrate overwhelming superiority, or they will continue their attack, and the transport will be destroyed in the crossfire. Target their weapons systems only, Picard ordered. Disable them, but I want no casualties if possible. Worf's fingers moved across his console, firing phasers. The Enterprise's weapons lanced out with precision, striking the lead Nausicaan vessel's weapon arrays. Explosions blossomed across its hull, and the raider began to drift, disabled but intact. The other 2 vessels immediately broke off their attack on the transport and turned toward the Enterprise, weapons charging. They're preparing to fire on us, Captain, Worf reported. Quantum torpedoes locked on our position. Evasive maneuvers, return fire, disable only. The battle was brief and brutal. The Enterprise, even showing restraint, was more than a match for 3 raider vessels. Within minutes, all 3 Nausicaan ships were disabled, their crews alive, but their vessels crippled and drifting.
The Tyrant is hailing us, Data announced. They report moderate damage but no casualties. The Nausicaans had not yet completed their boarding action when we arrived. Relief washed over the bridge. 200 lives saved because the Emperor had moved them across space instantaneously, had given them the impossible gift of time. Well done, Captain, Revelation said quietly. Your restraint is admirable. In my Imperium, those raiders would have been destroyed utterly, ships and crews both, as an example to others who might consider such actions. We are not an empire, Picard replied, but there was less heat in his voice than there might have been. We defend, we protect, but we do not execute without trial. Even when your enemy has already demonstrated lethal intent, even when you know they will, if given the opportunity, commit the same crimes again. Before Picard could answer, alarms blared across the bridge. Captain! Worf's voice was sharp with alarm. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple vessels entering the system. 8 Nausicaan warships, heavy cruiser class. They must have been the main fleet. These 3 were just scouts. Data's fingers flew across his console. Their weapon signatures are significantly more powerful than the vessels we just disabled. Collectively, they outgunned the Enterprise by a factor of 3 to 1. They're hailing us, Worf said, surprise evident in his voice. On screen! The view screen shimmered, revealing a Nausicaan commander whose face was a roadmap of scars. When he spoke, his voice was a guttural snarl barely shaped into words. Federation vessel, you have disabled 3 of our ships. You have interfered with our legitimate salvage operation. You will surrender your vessel immediately, or we will destroy you and take it by force. Legitimate salvage, Riker said incredulously. You were attacking a civilian transport. The Nausicaaan's lips pulled back from his teeth in what might have been a smile. The transport entered our claimed territory. By Nausicaan law, it and all aboard became our property. You have 1 minute to surrender before we demonstrate why the Federation's peace-loving weakness will be its doom.
The transmission cut off. Picard turned to his tactical officer. Mr. Worf, assessment. We cannot defeat 8 heavy cruisers in direct combat, Worf said bluntly. I recommend we call for reinforcements and attempt to retreat while protecting the T'Pren. Unacceptable, Revelation said, and there was steel in his voice now. Retreat would mean abandoning the transport to its fate. Your reinforcements cannot arrive in time. And these Nausicaans have just demonstrated exactly what I have been trying to explain to you for 3 days. He stepped forward, and his presence seemed to fill the entire bridge. There are species in the cosmos, in every cosmos apparently, that do not respond to diplomacy, that do not respect treaties or borders or the sanctity of life. They understand only power, only the demonstration of absolute supremacy. Your Federation has thrived because you have been fortunate enough to encounter primarily reasonable species. But what happens when you encounter the unreasonable? When your principles of restraint meet their principle of predation? We adapt, Picard said firmly. We find another way. There is no other way, Captain. Not here, not now. You can retreat and let 200 innocents die, violating everything your Federation claims to stand for. Or you can fight against superior numbers and likely be destroyed, accomplishing nothing. Or, Revelation's eyes began to glow with that inner fire. You can allow me to show you what true protection looks like. What are you suggesting? Picard asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Let me fight for you, not as a Federation officer bound by your rules of engagement, but as what I am, a weapon forged across 40,000 years to destroy those who would prey upon humanity. I can eliminate those vessels in minutes. No threat to their crews unless absolutely necessary, though I suspect it will be necessary. No risk to the Enterprise or the transport. A clean, decisive victory that will send a message to every would-be raider in the sector that Federation space is not the soft target they believe it to be. Absolutely not, Picard said immediately. We are not executioners. Then you are corpses who simply have not stopped breathing yet. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Before anyone could respond, the Nausicaan fleet opened fire. 8 heavy cruisers unleashed their full arsenals simultaneously. Disruptor beams, photon torpedoes, plasma charges, all converging on the Enterprise's position in a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm shields through sheer volume of fire. The shields held, but barely. The ship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring as system after system reported damage. "Shields down to 42%, Worf announced. "Another salvo like that, and we will be in serious trouble." "Return fire," Picard ordered. "Target their engines. Try to disable their ability to maneuver." But even as the Enterprise's phasers lanced out, scoring hits on 2 of the Nausicaan vessels, it was clear that this was a battle they could not win through conventional means. The raiders were spreading out, taking up positions that would allow them to fire from multiple vectors simultaneously. They were going to tear the Enterprise apart piece by piece, and then they were going to destroy the transport and everyone aboard it. Revelation stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, his expression one of infinite patience. "Captain," he said quietly, his voice somehow audible over the alarms and weapons fire. "I have watched you for 3 days. I have studied your principles, your restraint, your commitment to finding peaceful solutions, and I respect them more than you know. But respect does not change reality. Those ships are going to kill everyone aboard the T'Pren. Then they are going to kill everyone aboard your vessel. Then they are going to spread the word that the Federation is weak, that your ships can be overwhelmed by sufficient violence. And more raiders will come, emboldened by this victory." Another salvo struck the Enterprise. The lights flickered. Someone screamed as their console exploded in a shower of sparks. "Shields at 28%, Worf reported, his voice tight. Picard stared at the view screen, watching 8 Predator vessels moving in for the kill, and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. 200 lives on the transport, over 1,000 on the Enterprise, all dependent on his decision. He thought of the Prime Directive, of the careful balance between intervention and restraint. He thought of the Federation's founding principles, the belief that every sentient being deserved the chance for redemption, that violence should always be the last resort. And then he thought of those 73 children aboard the T'Pren, and what would happen to them if the Nausicaans won this battle.
"Revelation," he said quietly. "If I allow you to act, can you disable those vessels without killing their crews?" The Emperor met his eyes, and for just a moment, Picard saw something almost like approval there. "I can try, Captain, but I will not risk the lives of innocents to preserve the lives of predators. If they force my hand, I will do what is necessary to protect the defenseless. That is all I can promise." Picard looked at Riker, at Troy, at the crew who trusted him to make the right choice. Then he looked back at Revelation and gave the smallest of nods. "Do what you must." The Emperor of Mankind smiled, not with pleasure, but with the grim satisfaction of a craftsman finally allowed to practice his art. "As you wish." He raised his hand, and golden light erupted from his palm like a star being born.
3 days had passed since the Emperor of Mankind, Revelation, as he insisted they call him, had agreed to remain aboard the Enterprise. 3 days during which the ship's routine had been simultaneously maintained and utterly disrupted by his presence. He did not sleep. He did not eat, though he accepted water with a courtesy that seemed archaic. He spent his time in what the crew began calling the observations, hours-long sessions where he would accompany various departments, watching their work with that unnerving intensity that made even the most confident officer feel like a student before a particularly exacting professor. He asked questions that cut to the heart of every system, every protocol, every assumption that underpinned Federation society. And slowly, inexorably, his presence began to reveal cracks. It started in engineering. Geordi LaForge had been explaining the principles of the warp drive to Revelation, detailing the careful balance required to maintain a stable warp field without damaging subspace. The Emperor had listened patiently, then asked a single question that had stopped the chief engineer mid-sentence. "Why do you limit yourselves to such primitive field geometries?" Geordi had bristled at the word primitive, but before he could respond, Revelation had moved to a display panel and with a series of gestures that somehow interfaced with Federation technology despite having no physical connection, had shown them a different configuration. one that, according to the Emperor's calculations, would increase their maximum warp speed by nearly 30% while reducing energy consumption. The principles are sound, though you lack the mathematical framework to see why. In my reality, humanity achieved faster than light travel through understanding that space itself could be manipulated not as a fabric to be compressed, but as a medium to be temporarily altered at the quantum level. Your warp fields are serviceable, but they could be so much more.
The engineering team had spent 2 days attempting to verify his equations. Every calculation checked out. The Emperor had, in 15 minutes, improved upon a technology that had taken the Federation decades to refine. Similar scenes played out across the ship. In medical, Dr. Crusher had shown him their most advanced surgical techniques, their methods for treating formerly incurable diseases, their success in extending human lifespans. The Emperor had nodded appreciatively, then mentioned offhandedly that in his Imperium he had created warriors who could survive wounds that would kill an ordinary human 10 times over, whose lifespans measured in centuries, whose very genetics had been rewritten to make them the apex of human potential. But at what cost, Dr. Crusher had asked, her voice tight with controlled anger as he described the process of creating a space marine, the brutal surgeries, the genetic modification of adolescent subjects, the horrifying mortality rate during the transformation. At the cost of everything, Revelation had replied quietly. Their humanity, their childhood, their choice. I took boys and made them into weapons because I needed weapons that could face the horrors I knew awaited us. It was necessary. Necessary, Dr. Crusher had repeated, the word heavy with condemnation. You speak of necessity as though it absolves you of moral responsibility. It does not absolve me, Doctor. It merely explains me. Now, on the 4th day of his stay, the Enterprise received a distress call that would put the Emperor's observations and the Federation's principles to their ultimate test. Captain, Worf announced from Tactical, his voice carrying an edge of urgency. I am receiving a distress signal from the transport vessel T'Pren. They report that they are under attack by Nausicaan raiders. They are requesting immediate assistance. Picard rose from his command chair. Distance to their position. 37 minutes at maximum warp, Data replied. However, Captain, sensors indicate 3 Nausicaan attack vessels surrounding the transport. The T'Pren is a civilian vessel, lightly armed, carrying approximately 200 passengers, including 73 children. Red alert. Set course to intercept, maximum warp. Picard's jaw was set. Mr. Worf, tactical analysis. Before Worf could respond, Revelation, who had been standing in his usual position near the rear of the bridge, observing, spoke.
The Nausicans, a species that values strength above all, that engages in piracy and mercenary work as both economy and culture. I have been reviewing your database. They are unlikely to negotiate, unlikely to be deterred by threats, and unlikely to show mercy to their victims. By the time you arrive, most of those aboard the T'Pren will be dead or worse. With respect, we have dealt with Nausicaan raiders before. And how many died before you dealt with them, Captain? 37 minutes. In my experience, raiders work quickly. They will breach the hull, kill anyone who resists, take what they want, cargo, valuables, slaves,
and destroy the vessel to eliminate witnesses. You are traveling as fast as your technology allows, and it is not fast enough. We can't change the laws of physics, Riker said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Revelation turned to look at him, and something shifted in his expression. A decision made. No, Commander, you cannot, but I can. Golden light began to shimmer around his form, that same impossible radiance that had heralded his arrival. The bridge crew stepped back instinctively as energy began to build, not threatening, but undeniably present. The Emperor closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they blazed with power that made the view screen seem dim by comparison. "I am going to do something you will find difficult to believe," he said calmly. "I am going to move this vessel across space instantaneously. Hold on to something." "Wait," Picard began, but it was too late. The Emperor raised both hands, and reality screamed. For a single, eternal instant, the Enterprise existed in two places at once. The crew felt it, a sensation of being stretched across light years, of occupying infinite positions simultaneously, of their consciousness expanding to encompass distances that the human mind was never meant to process. Then, with a snap that was felt rather than heard, they were somewhere else.
The view screen showed the T-Prim surrounded by 3 Nausicaan vessels, weapons fire already tearing into the transport's hull. They had arrived instantaneously. The 37-minute journey had taken no time at all. "Report," Picard managed, gripping his chair as the bridge crew struggled to orient themselves. Several officers were openly retching, their inner ears unable to process what had just occurred. "We are at the T-Prim's location," Data reported, his voice unsteady in a way it had never been before. "Captain, according to our instruments, we did not travel through space. We simply ceased to be at our previous location and began to be at this location. This is theoretically impossible." "Not impossible," Revelation said, and his voice carried a weariness that suggested the feat had cost him something. "I have bent space to my will, moved us through the webway, though that is not quite the right term in this reality. Call it a psychic corridor between 2 points in space-time. The mechanism matters less than the result." He gestured toward the view screen. "You are here now, Captain. 200 lives hang in the balance. What will you do with this opportunity?" Picard forced himself to focus, pushed aside the 1,000 questions screaming in his mind. Lives first, understanding later. "Mr. Worf, open all hailing frequencies. Nausicaan vessels, this is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation's starship Enterprise. You are attacking a civilian transport in violation of Federation law. Cease your assault immediately and withdraw, or we will be forced to respond." The Nausicaan response came quickly, a burst of disruptor fire across the Enterprise's bow. No words, just violence, the universal language of predators who believed themselves to be the apex. "They're not going to negotiate," Revelation observed. "Nausicaans respect only force. You must demonstrate overwhelming superiority, or they will continue their attack, and the transport will be destroyed in the crossfire. Target their weapon systems only. Disable them, but I want no casualties if possible." Worf's fingers moved across his console. "Firing phasers." The Enterprise's weapons lanced out with precision, striking the lead Nausicaan vessel's weapon arrays. Explosions blossomed across its hull, and the raider began to drift, disabled but intact. The other 2 vessels immediately broke off their attack on the transport and turned toward the Enterprise, weapons charging.
"They are preparing to fire on us, Captain," Worf reported. "Quantum torpedoes locked on our position. Evasive maneuvers, return fire, disable only."
The battle was brief and brutal. The Enterprise, even showing restraint, was more than a match for 3 raider vessels. Within minutes, all 3 Nausicaan ships were disabled, their crews alive, but their vessels crippled and drifting. "The Tyranny is hailing us," Data announced. "They report moderate damage, but no casualties. The Nausicaans had not yet completed their boarding action when we arrived." Relief washed over the bridge. 200 lives saved because the Emperor had moved them across space instantaneously, had given them the impossible gift of time. "Well done, Captain," Revelation said quietly. "Your restraint is admirable. In my Imperium, those raiders would have been destroyed utterly, ships and crews both, as an example to others who might consider such actions." "We are not an empire," Picard replied, but there was less heat in his voice than there might have been. "We defend, we protect, but we do not execute without trial. Even when your enemy has already demonstrated lethal intent, even when you know they will, if given the opportunity, commit the same crimes again." Before Picard could answer, alarms blared across the bridge. "Captain," Worf's voice was sharp with alarm. "Long-range sensors are detecting multiple vessels entering the system. 6, no, 8 Nausicaan warships, heavy cruiser class. They must have been the main fleet. These were just scouts." Data's fingers flew across his console. "Their weapon signatures are significantly more powerful than the vessels we just disabled. Collectively, they outgun the Enterprise by a factor of 3 to 1. "They're hailing us," Worf said, surprise evident in his voice. On screen, the view screen shimmered, revealing a Nausicaan commander whose face was a roadmap of scars. When he spoke, his voice was a guttural snarl, barely shaped into words.
"Federation vessel, you have disabled 3 of our ships. You have interfered with our legitimate salvage operation. You will surrender your vessel immediately, or we will destroy you and take it by force." "Legitimate salvage?" Riker said incredulously. "You were attacking a civilian transport." The Nausicaan's lips pulled back from his teeth in what might have been a smile. "The transport entered our claimed territory. By Nausicaan law, it and all aboard became our property. You have 1 minute to surrender before we demonstrate why the Federation's peace-loving weakness will be its doom." The transmission cut off. Picard turned to his tactical officer. "Mr. Worf, assessment." "We cannot defeat 8 heavy cruisers in direct combat," Worf said bluntly. "I recommend we call for reinforcements and attempt to retreat while protecting the Tyranny." "Unacceptable," Revelation said, and there was steel in his voice now. "Retreat would mean abandoning the transport to its fate. Your reinforcements cannot arrive in time. And these Nausicaans have just demonstrated exactly what I have been trying to explain to you for 3 days." He stepped forward, and his presence seemed to fill the entire bridge. "There are species in the cosmos, in every cosmos apparently, that do not respond to diplomacy, that do not respect treaties or borders or the sanctity of life. They understand only power, only the demonstration of absolute supremacy. Your Federation has thrived because you have been fortunate enough to encounter primarily reasonable species. But what happens when you encounter the unreasonable? When your principles of restraint meet their principle of predation?" "We adapt," Picard said firmly. "We find another way." "There is no other way, Captain. Not here, not now. You can retreat
and let 200 innocents die, violating everything your Federation claims to stand for. Or you can fight against superior numbers and likely be destroyed, accomplishing nothing. Or, Revelation's eyes began to glow with that inner fire.
Let me fight for you, not as a Federation officer bound by your rules of engagement, but as what I am, a weapon forged across 40,000 years to destroy those who would prey upon humanity. I can eliminate those vessels in minutes, no threat to their crews unless absolutely necessary, though I suspect it will be necessary. No risk to the Enterprise or the transport. A clean, decisive victory that will send a message to every would-be raider in the sector that Federation space is not the soft target they believe it to be. Absolutely not, Picard said immediately. We are not executioners. Then you are corpses who simply have not stopped breathing yet. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Before anyone could respond, the Nausicaan fleet opened fire. 8 heavy cruisers unleashed their full arsenal simultaneously. Disruptor beams, photon torpedoes, plasma charges, all converging on the Enterprise's position in a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm shields through sheer volume of fire. The shields held, but barely. The ship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring as system after system reported damage. "Shields down to 42%, Worf announced. "Another salvo like that and we will be in serious trouble." "Return fire," Picard ordered. "Target their engines. Try to disable their ability to maneuver." But even as the Enterprise's phasers lanced out, scoring hits on 2 of the Nausicaan vessels, it was clear that this was a battle they could not win through conventional means. The raiders were spreading out, taking up positions that would allow them to fire from multiple vectors simultaneously. They were going to tear the Enterprise apart piece by piece, and then they were going to destroy the transport and everyone aboard it.
Revelation stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, his expression one of infinite patience. "Captain," he said quietly, his voice somehow audible over the alarms and weapons fire, "I have watched you for 3 days. I have studied your principles, your restraint, your commitment to finding peaceful solutions, and I respect them more than you know. But respect does not change reality. Those ships are going to kill everyone aboard the T'Pren. Then they are going to kill everyone aboard your vessel. Then they are going to spread the word that the Federation is weak, that your ships can be overwhelmed by sufficient violence, and more raiders will come, emboldened by this victory." Another salvo struck the Enterprise. The lights flickered. Someone screamed as their console exploded in a shower of sparks. "Shields at 28%, Worf reported, his voice tight. Picard stared at the view screen, watching 8 Predator vessels moving in for the kill, and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. 200 lives on the transport, over 1,000 on the Enterprise, all dependent on his decision. He thought of the Prime Directive, of the careful balance between intervention and restraint. He thought of the Federation's founding principles, the belief that every sentient being deserved the chance for redemption, that violence should always be the last resort. And then he thought of those 73 children aboard the T'Pren, and what would happen to them if the Nausicians won this battle. "Revelation," he said quietly. "If I allow you to act, can you disable those ships without killing their crews?" The Emperor met his eyes, and for just a moment, Picard saw something almost like approval there. "I can try, Captain, but I will not risk the lives of innocents to preserve the lives of predators. If they force my hand, I will do what is necessary to protect the defenseless.
That is all I can promise." Picard looked at Riker, at Troy, at the crew who trusted him to make the right choice. Then he looked back at Revelation and gave the smallest of nods. "Do what you must." The Emperor of mankind smiled, not with pleasure, but with the grim satisfaction of a craftsman finally allowed to practice his art. "As you wish." He raised his hand, and golden light erupted from his palm like a star being born.
The Emperor moved with the practiced economy of a being who had waged war across the stars for longer than human civilization had possessed written language. One moment, he stood on the bridge of the Enterprise, his hand raised, golden light coalescing around him like a corona. The next moment, he was simply gone. Not transported in the familiar shimmer of Federation technology, but erased from one location and inscribed into another through an act of will that defied every law of physics the crew understood. He reappeared in the void between the Enterprise and the Nausicaan fleet. No spacesuit, no environmental protection, just a figure in golden armor standing in hard vacuum as though it were a summer afternoon on Earth. The stars themselves seemed to dim in his presence, as if reality recognized that something greater than mere matter occupied this space. All Nausicaan vessels, his voice boomed across every communication frequency simultaneously, bypassing encryption and jamming with contemptuous ease. "You have attacked civilians under the protection of the United Federation of Planets. You have threatened a Starfleet vessel engaged in a lawful rescue operation. You have been given opportunities to withdraw. You have rejected mercy in favor of violence." The lead Nausicaan commander appeared on the view screen of the Enterprise, his scarred face twisted in confusion and rage. "What is this? What are you?" "I am what you should have feared," Revelation replied, and his voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of absolute authority. "I am the consequence of your choices. I am Revelation, and I have come to teach you the difference between predators and prey." The Nausicaan commander snarled something in his native tongue and made a cutting gesture. All 8 heavy cruisers opened fire simultaneously, not at the Enterprise this time, but at the solitary figure floating impossibly in the void. The energy discharge was spectacular, enough firepower to vaporize a small moon concentrated on a single human-sized target. Disruptor beams, plasma charges, photon torpedoes, and kinetic rounds converged in a sphere of destructive force that registered on the Enterprise's sensors as a miniature star. When the light faded, Revelation stood unchanged. Not shielded, not protected by any visible defense. The weapon's fire had simply stopped. Meters from his position, the energy had encountered something that treated the fundamental forces of the universe as negotiable suggestions. The torpedoes hung frozen in space, their detonation sequences interrupted. The energy beams dispersed into harmless radiation. The kinetic rounds drifted past him like leaves on a gentle breeze. "Impossible," Data whispered from his station, his positronic brain struggling to process what his sensors clearly showed. The energy simply ceased to exist in a spherical field around him. Not deflected, not absorbed, negated. This violates conservation of energy. It violates causality itself. On the bridge, Counselor Troy had collapsed into her chair.
her face pale, her empathic senses overwhelmed by what she was experiencing. "He's not defending himself," she gasped. "He's rewriting the rules. He's telling reality that those weapons don't work, and reality is agreeing with him." Revelation raised both hands, and the frozen torpedoes began to glow with that same golden light. Then, moving with the lazy precision of a conductor directing an orchestra, he sent them back toward the Nausicaan vessels, not as weapons now, but as something else entirely. The torpedoes struck the heavy cruisers and simply stopped. Not exploded, stopped. And where they touched the Nausicaan hulls, the metal began to change. Transmutation on a molecular level, visible even from the distance of the Enterprise's view screen. The aggressive angles of the warship's weapon arrays began to smooth, to soften, to transform into something that could not bring death. "He's turning their weapons into scrap metal," Geordi breathed from his engineering station, watching his instruments with disbelief. "Not destroying them, transforming them. The molecular structure is completely different. This is alchemy, actual, literal alchemy." One of the Nausicaan commanders found his voice screaming across the comm channels, "Warriors, board your fighters! Destroy this demon with mass and metal for the glory of Nausicaa!"
Dozens of small craft began launching from the heavy cruisers, single-pilot attack fighters armed with rapid-fire disruptors and suicide-charged plasma bombs. They swarmed toward Revelation like angry insects, filling the space between the fleets with a cloud of deadly intent. The Emperor watched them come with something that might have been sadness. "So be it," he said quietly, though his voice still carried across all frequencies. "I offered you the chance to live. You have chosen otherwise." He spoke a single word, a word in a language that predated human speech, that resonated with harmonics no human throat should be able to produce. The word was light and law and ending. Every Nausicaan fighter simply stopped. Their engines cut out. Their life support systems went dark. Their pilots slumped unconscious in their cockpits as the Emperor's will swept through them like an anesthetic wave, shutting down neural activity without causing permanent damage. 73 attack craft became 73 floating coffins, temporary coffins, but coffins nonetheless. "Their life signs are stable," Data reported, his voice carrying wonder despite his inability to feel emotion in the human sense. "He has rendered them all unconscious simultaneously. The precision required to affect that many individual nervous systems across such a distance, to calibrate the effect to each species' unique neurology, it should be impossible."
"He keeps doing impossible things," Riker said quietly. "The question is, why is he showing restraint? He could have killed them all." As if in answer to that question, Revelation turned his attention to the heavy cruisers themselves. He began to move, not flying, not propelling himself through thrust or anti-gravity, but simply relocating his position through space, as though distance were a polite fiction he had chosen to temporarily acknowledge. He approached the lead Nausicaan vessel, the one whose commander had ordered the attack on the transport, had threatened the Enterprise, had sent his fighters to their temporary doom. The Emperor placed one palm against the ship's hull, and golden light poured from his hand into the metal. On the bridge of that vessel, the Nausicaan commander watched in horror as his view screen showed the impossible being attached to his ship like a parasite. "All weapons, fire at point-blank range! Kill it! Kill it now!" The ship's internal disruptor batteries activated, firing at the section of hull where Revelation stood. The energy tore through the ship's own structure, breaching compartments, killing crew members caught in the crossfire. But where the Emperor stood, the hull remained intact, his presence somehow protecting the very thing the Nausicaan were trying to destroy. And then he spoke, his voice now broadcasting directly into the commander's mind. "You have killed your own crew in your desperation to destroy me. This is what separates us. I protect even those who wish me harm, while you sacrifice your own people for pride. Watch now and understand what you have brought upon yourself." The golden light spread from his palm, flowing through the ship's systems like luminous blood through mechanical veins. Every weapon system shut down. Every engine went cold. Life support remained functional. The Emperor was not a murderer when he could avoid it. But everything that could be used to harm others simply ceased to function. And then he did something that made even Captain Picard, watching from the Enterprise, draw in a sharp breath. He reached into the ship's computer systems, not through any interface, not through hacking or technical skill, but through direct psychic contact with the machine itself. He read its memory banks, absorbed its data, learned everything about the Nausicaan operation in an instant. And what he learned made his expression harden. "Captain Picard," Revelation's voice came through the Enterprise's speakers. "You should know the truth about these raiders before you judge my actions too harshly. Their computers contain records of 17 attacks in the past 4 months. Not salvage operations, attacks on civilian vessels, stations, and colonies. 437 confirmed deaths. An additional 212 individuals sold into slavery. 23 children among them." The bridge fell silent. Even Worf, who had advocated for aggressive action, looked shaken by the numbers. "The Federation's restraint," Revelation continued, his voice carrying none of its earlier authority, just flat, weary fact. "Your careful rules of engagement, your insistence on minimum force, your reluctance to pursue raiders beyond your borders. The Nausicaans interpret these things as weakness. They have learned that attacking Federation targets carries minimal risk. You disable their ships, rescue their victims, and send them on their way with barely a slap on the wrist. So, they do it again and again, and the body count rises." He released the ship and drifted backward, regarding the 8 heavy cruisers with an expression of profound disappointment. "You, all." Golden light began to build around him again, but this time it was different, not aggressive, but transformative. The light reached out toward all 8 vessels, enveloping them in its radiance. "I am going to give you something you do not deserve: understanding. For the next 10 seconds, you will experience what your victims experienced. Every moment of fear, every instant of pain, every desperate prayer that went unanswered. You will feel what you have inflicted upon others, and then you will decide whether you wish to continue your chosen path." What happened next would haunt the crew of the Enterprise for years to come. The Nausicaan began to scream. Every raider on every ship, from the commanders to the lowest-ranking crew member, suddenly found themselves experiencing something beyond their comprehension.
through whatever mechanism the Emperor employed: telepathy, psychic projection, direct neural manipulation. They felt it all. The terror of civilians watching raiders breach their hull, the agony of disruptor fire tearing through unprotected bodies, the despair of children watching their parents die, the hopelessness of being dragged away to a life of slavery, knowing no rescue would come. 437 deaths experienced simultaneously from the victim's perspective. 212 enslavements felt as though they were happening to their own bodies and minds. 10 seconds. It lasted only 10 seconds. When it ended, the screaming stopped. Silence fell across the Nausicaan fleet like a shroud. Some of the raiders were weeping. Some were catatonic, their minds temporarily broken by the magnitude of suffering they had inflicted and now understood. A few, the strongest, or perhaps the most broken, simply sat in their chairs, staring at nothing, recalculating everything they thought they knew about the universe. Revelation drifted back toward the Enterprise, his expression unreadable. "I have disabled their vessels and rendered their weapons inoperable," he said, his voice now directed only to the Federation ship. "I have done what I can to teach them the error of their ways, though I suspect some will learn nothing and others will learn too much. Their life support remains functional. You may summon your authorities to take them into custody, or you may leave them here to contemplate their choices until their own people come to retrieve them. That decision is yours, Captain." He vanished from the void and reappeared on the bridge of the Enterprise in that same instantaneous transition. But this time, he looked diminished, not weakened. His power remained evident in the way reality seemed to bend slightly around him, but tired in a way that suggested the effort had cost him something beyond mere energy. "What you did to them," Picard said slowly, his voice carefully controlled, "that was torture." "Yes," Revelation agreed, without hesitation or shame. "I forced them to experience the consequences of their actions. I made them understand, in the only way their psychology would permit, the suffering they had caused. Was it torture? By any definition, yes. Was it also the most merciful punishment I could conceive for beings who had murdered and enslaved hundreds? Also yes." "You had no right," Picard began, but the Emperor cut him off with a raised hand. "I had every right, Captain. I am not bound by your Federation's laws. I am not subject to your moral framework. I am a sovereign being acting to protect innocents from predators. I asked you to show restraint, and I did. Not one Nausicaan died by my hand today. Their ships are intact, their crews alive, their consciousness unharmed in any permanent sense. Can you say the same for their victims?" The challenge hung in the air, unanswerable because the answer was obvious. Dr. Crusher's voice came over the comms system. "Captain, we're receiving hails from the T'Pren. They're thanking us. The Vulcan captain says that what we did today saved not just their lives, but potentially dozens of future victims. He's requesting permission to transmit a commendation to Starfleet Command on our behalf."
Picard closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of command pressing down on him. His crew was safe. The transport was safe. 200 innocent lives had been preserved. And all that had cost was his principles,
or rather, the illusion that his principles could function in every situation. "Mr. Data," he said quietly, "contact the nearest Starfleet security vessel. Have them retrieve the Nausicaan ships and take the crews into custody. They'll face trial for their crimes." "Aye, Captain." Picard turned to face Revelation, who stood watching him with those ancient, knowing eyes. "What you did today was effective, I acknowledge. It saved lives, prevented future crimes, and accomplished in minutes what might have taken days or weeks through conventional means. But it also violated everything the Federation stands for. We do not torture prisoners. We do not inflict suffering even on those who have inflicted suffering on others. We believe in rehabilitation, in the possibility of redemption. And how many innocents die while you wait to see if predators can be rehabilitated? How many children are sold into slavery while you pursue due process? How many civilians are murdered while you debate the ethics of intervention? Those are the costs of maintaining our principles. The moment we abandon them for expediency, we become no different from those we oppose. No, Captain, you become effective. There is a difference between becoming a monster and becoming capable of protecting others from monsters. You confuse the two at your peril."
Counselor Troy, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse, exhausted from the empathic strain of proximity to such events. "He doesn't enjoy it," she said quietly. "Captain, I can sense his emotions throughout all of this. When he hurt those raiders, when he made them experience their victims' suffering, it brought him no pleasure. Only a grim satisfaction that comes from completing a necessary task. He genuinely believes he did the minimum required to protect innocence and prevent future harm." "Belief doesn't make it right," Picard countered. "Perhaps not," Revelation agreed. "But in my universe, the luxury of debating right and wrong is something only those protected by violence can afford. I have been that violence for 10,000 years. I have made the choices that allow others to maintain their principles, and I have carried the weight of those choices alone, because I believed that if I did not, humanity would perish." He moved toward the view screen, looking out at the disabled Nausicaan vessels drifting in space like broken toys. "Today I have seen your Federation's way. You arrived in time because I gave you time. You saved the transport because I moved your ship across space instantaneously. You preserved your principles because I compromised mine. And you will walk away from this believing that your way is superior, that your restraint is righteous. But ask yourself this, Captain. If I had not been here, how would this encounter have ended?" The question was rhetorical, but everyone on the bridge knew the answer. Without Revelation's intervention, the Enterprise would have arrived 37 minutes late. The transport would have been destroyed or captured, its passengers dead or enslaved, and the Nausicaan fleet would have escaped to continue their predation on other innocents. Picard wanted to argue, wanted to defend the Federation's methods, wanted to prove that there had been another way. But standing there, looking at the saved transport on his view screen, he found himself unable to speak.
"I did not come to your universe to judge you," Revelation said quietly. "I came because reality placed me here,
and I am trying to understand how you have built something that should not exist. A peaceful, prosperous civilization based on cooperation and trust. And perhaps in time, I will come to see that your way has merit, even in situations where mine would seem necessary. He turned away from the view screen, meeting Picard's eyes. But today is not that day. Today, you needed a monster to protect your innocence. And I was here to be that monster, so that you could remain pure. Whether you can accept that truth is your burden to bear, Captain. Mine is knowing that I did what was necessary, and that 200 lives continue because of it. The Emperor walked to the turbo lift, and the doors opened at his approach without anyone touching the controls. As he stepped inside, he paused and looked back. You have 3 days left before the temporal anomaly that brought me here destabilizes sufficiently for me to return to my own reality. 3 days to show me that your way can function without someone like me lurking in the shadows, doing the dark work you prefer not to acknowledge. I hope you succeed, Captain, because if you cannot, then everything I have built in my own timeline, all the suffering I have caused and justified, was necessary after all. The turbo lift doors closed, and the Emperor of Mankind was gone, leaving behind a bridge full of officers who were no longer certain they understood the difference between right and necessary.
The final 3 days of the Emperor's presence aboard the Enterprise passed with an intensity that left the crew exhausted and fundamentally changed. Word of what had happened with the Nausicaan raiders had spread throughout the ship despite efforts to contain it, not through official channels, but through the inevitable gossip that occurred when hundreds of people witnessed something that challenged everything they believed about the universe and their place within it. Revelation had retreated to guest quarters after the incident, but his presence still permeated the ship like radiation from an unstable element. Crew members reported strange dreams, visions of golden cities spanning continents, of armies marching beneath a unified banner, of a future where humanity stood alone against an uncaring cosmos. The ship's Betazoid and Vulcan officers confirmed that the Emperor's psychic presence was bleeding through his control, not intentionally, but simply because containing power of that magnitude was like trying to hold back an ocean with a paper dam. On the second day, Captain Picard received a message from Starfleet Command. Admiral Nechaev's face on the view screen was carefully neutral, but her words carried weight. Captain, we've reviewed your report on the entity you're harboring aboard the Enterprise. Starfleet intelligence has some concerns about a being who can move vessels instantaneously, transmute matter, and inflict psychic attacks on enemy combatants. They're recommending that you take every precaution to ensure this revelation doesn't pose a threat to the Federation. Picard had wanted to laugh at the absurdity of that recommendation. Precautions against a being who could walk through walls, survive in hard vacuum, and rewrite the laws of physics through sheer will? What precautions could possibly be effective? With respect, Admiral, if the Emperor wanted to harm the Federation, there's very little we could do to stop him. He's shown remarkable restraint given his capabilities.
That restraint may not last, Captain. Starfleet Command is dispatching a task force to your location. 3 ships, including the Excalibur. They'll arrive in 36 hours. Until then, you are to monitor the entity closely and report any changes in his behavior or intentions. After the transmission ended, Picard had sat in his ready room for a long time, staring at the stars beyond his window. A task force, as if 3 additional Starfleet vessels would make any difference if the Emperor decided to demonstrate his true power. The gesture was simultaneously pragmatic and absurd. The Federation doing what it always did, applying bureaucratic solutions to existential problems. But beneath the Admiral's official concern, Picard had heard something else: fear. The Federation was afraid, not just of Revelation himself, but of what he represented. A vision of humanity that had chosen order over freedom, unity over diversity, survival over principles. Everything the Federation had defined itself against, made manifest in a single, impossibly powerful individual. On the evening of the second day, Picard found Revelation in 10 Forward, sitting alone at a table near the windows. The Emperor was watching the stars drift past, and there was something in his posture, a subtle relaxation that seemed almost peaceful, that made him appear more human than he had since his arrival. "May I join you?" Picard asked. Revelation gestured to the seat across from him. "Please, Captain, I have been expecting you. We have much to discuss before I depart." Picard sat, noting that Guinan, the enigmatic bartender whose species possessed lifespans that dwarf human centuries, was watching them from behind the bar with an expression of profound wariness. Whatever she sensed in the Emperor clearly unsettled even her ancient wisdom. "You said the temporal anomaly would allow you to return in 3 days. I assume you've calculated the exact moment. Approximately 16 hours from now. The dimensional barrier between our realities is cyclical in nature. When it reaches its thinnest point, I will be able to pass through and return to my own timeline, assuming, of course, that I choose to do so."
That last sentence hung in the air like a blade. "You're considering staying," Picard said, and it wasn't a question. "I am considering many things, Captain." The Emperor's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "I have spent these days observing your Federation with the eyes of someone who has seen civilizations rise and fall across millennia, and I find myself conflicted." He turned to face Picard directly, and there was a vulnerability in his expression that the captain had not seen before. "Your Federation is miraculous, Captain Picard. Truly miraculous. You have accomplished what I deemed impossible. You have created a multi-species alliance based on mutual respect rather than domination. You have eliminated scarcity through technology rather than rationing through tyranny. You have maintained democratic government across light years without fracturing into warring factions. Every day I spend here, I witness evidence that my assumptions about what humanity requires to survive were incomplete." "And yet," Picard prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation, "and yet, your Federation exists in a universe fundamentally different from my own. Your subspace is quiet. There are no entities of malevolent consciousness waiting to pour through every psychic mind. Your alien species, while sometimes hostile, are comprehensible and can be negotiated with. Your technology has not betrayed you. You have not experienced the fall that shaped my timeline, have not witnessed the near extinction that made my methods necessary." Revelation leaned forward, and his intensity was like standing before a fire.
I have spent 10,000 years believing that my way, absolute authority, enforced unity, the suppression of religion and diversity in favor of a single imperial truth, was the only path that could preserve humanity. And now I discover a reality where that is not true, where humanity thrived without me, where my entire philosophy, my entire existence might have been unnecessary.
Is that why you're conflicted? Picard asked gently. Because we proved that there was another way. Partially. But more than that, I am conflicted because I cannot decide whether to be hopeful or horrified. The Emperor's hands clenched into fists on the table. If your Federation is proof that peaceful coexistence is possible, that democracies can survive the void between stars, that humanity can prosper through cooperation rather than conquest, then perhaps when I return to my own timeline, I can begin to dismantle the Imperium. Perhaps I can guide my species towards something better than the totalitarian nightmare I created. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was barely above a whisper. But if your success is purely circumstantial, if you have simply not yet encountered the horrors that made my methods necessary, then your Federation is a beautiful lie, a garden that flourishes only because the wolves have not yet found it. And when they do, all of this, he gestured around 10 forward, at the diverse species sitting together in peaceful conversation, all of this will burn, and billions will die because they believed that principles mattered more than survival. Picard was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. You're asking the wrong question. You're asking whether your universe or ours is the true reality. Which methods are correct? But the answer is that both can be true. Your methods may have been necessary in your universe, and ours may be necessary in this one. The mistake would be assuming that what works in one context must work in all contexts. Spoken like a true diplomat, Revelation said, but there was no mockery in his tone. You seek the middle ground, the compromise that allows both perspectives to coexist. It is admirable, but it is also, I think, insufficient, because I will return to my Imperium in 16 hours, and I will be faced with a choice. Continue as I have, maintaining the brutal machinery that has kept humanity alive for 10 millennia, or attempt to reform it based on what I have learned here, knowing that such reforms might weaken us at a time when we cannot afford weakness?
What does your heart tell you? Picard asked. The Emperor laughed, a sound so unexpected that several nearby tables turned to stare. It was not cruel laughter, but genuinely amused, tinged with something that might have been bitterness or might have been relief. My heart, Captain. I abandoned my heart 30,000 years ago. I have been logic and will and necessity for so long that I barely remember what it felt like to simply feel without calculating the strategic implications of those feelings. But if you're asking what I want, he trailed off, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. I want to believe that your Federation is possible. I want to believe that everything I have done, every atrocity I have committed or commanded was not universally necessary but contextually driven. I want to believe that in another universe, another timeline, I could have been something other than a tyrant. Then perhaps, Picard said slowly, the real question is not what you should do in your universe, but what you can take from ours. Not a blueprint to copy, but principles to adapt. The Federation works because we adjust our methods to match our circumstances while holding fast to our core values. Could your Imperium do the same? Before Revelation could answer, The ship's red alert klaxons began blaring. Picard's comrades chirped. "Captain, to the bridge immediately. We have a situation." Both men rose and moved toward the turbolift with synchronized urgency. As they rode toward the bridge, Picard asked, "Can you sense what's happening?" "Something is wrong with the fabric of space," Revelation replied, his eyes distant and glowing faintly. "The barrier between realities is destabilizing faster than my calculations predicted, and something else." His expression darkened. "Something is coming through."
They emerged onto the bridge to chaos. Every station was active, every officer calling out reports simultaneously. "Captain," Data's voice cut through the noise, "a massive spatial anomaly has appeared directly ahead. It is similar to the one that brought our guest here, but significantly larger and more unstable. I am detecting energy signatures that do not match anything in our database." "On screen," Picard ordered. The view screen showed a sight that made even the Emperor draw in a sharp breath. A tear in space, yes, but this was no controlled passage. It was a wound. A screaming gash in the fabric of reality that pulsed with sickly colors that hurt to look at. Purples and greens and colors that had no name because they should not exist in three-dimensional space. And through that wound, something was emerging. The ship was immense, easily 10 times the size of the Enterprise, its architecture a nightmarish fusion of organic and mechanical elements. Bones and metal fused together in ways that suggested agony and malevolence. Weapons bristled from every surface, and the hull seemed to writhe as though alive and in pain. But it was the psychic emanation from the vessel that truly horrified. Every telepathically sensitive being on the Enterprise felt it like a physical blow. Hatred, hunger, corruption, the desire to inflict suffering for its own sake. "Chaos," Revelation whispered, and there was genuine fear in his voice for the first time since his arrival. "That is a chaos vessel, a ship corrupted by the warp, crewed by cultists who have given themselves to the ruinous powers. It should not be here. This universe's dimensional barriers should have prevented it from following me." "Should have," Picard demanded. "My passage through realities weakened the barrier. I thought I had sealed it behind me, but apparently the gods of chaos saw an opportunity. A virgin universe untouched by their corruption, full of souls they could claim and torment. And I led them here." The chaos vessel finished emerging from the rift and immediately opened fire. Not at the Enterprise, but at a nearby inhabited system. A beam of energy that registered on sensors as impossible lanced out across the void towards a planet that Data's instruments identified as home to 3 billion inhabitants.
"Shields up, intercept course," Picard ordered. "Mr. Worf, target that vessel's weapon systems." But even as the Enterprise moved to intervene, they all knew they were too slow. The distance was too great, the targeting solution too complex. 3 billion people were about to die, and there was nothing conventional Starfleet tactics could do to prevent it. Revelation closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were burning with golden fire that hurt to look at directly. "No," he said simply. He raised one hand, and reality screamed. The beam of chaos energy, corrupt and wrong, and carrying the taint of entities that should not exist, simply stopped, froze in the void as if time itself had decided to take a break from its normal functioning. The Emperor's will, projected across impossible distances, had intercepted an attack that should have been unstoppable. But holding it was costing him. The crew could see it, the way his form seemed to flicker,
becoming less substantial as he poured everything he had into maintaining that impossible defense. "Captain," he said through gritted teeth, "that vessel must be destroyed immediately. I cannot hold this forever, and if the cultists aboard realize what they've found, a universe without chaos corruption, without the Imperium to oppose them, they will signal others. More will come. Your Federation will face horrors you cannot imagine." "Mr. Worf," Picard began, but revelation cut him off. "Your weapons will not penetrate their hull. It is blessed by the dark gods, protected by sorcery and daemon pacts. You would need to bombard them for hours, and we have seconds." The strain was evident in his voice now. "There is only one way to stop them, Captain. You must let me do what I was created to do. Let me be the weapon I have always been."
Picard stared at the nightmare ship on his view screen, at the suspended beam of corruption that threatened billions of innocent lives, and made his decision. Do it. The Emperor of Mankind released his hold on the corrupted beam, not abandoning it, but redirecting it. The energy lanced back toward its source with twice its original power, augmented by his own psychic might. It struck the Chaos vessel like the wrath of an angry god, and the ship began to burn. But not with ordinary fire. This was the fire of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guided ships through the warp in the Emperor's own universe. It was the anathema to chaos, the light that banished darkness, the absolute negation of everything the ruinous powers represented. The Chaos cultists aboard that ship died screaming, but their screams lasted only moments before their very souls were unmade. The demons that had been bound into the ship's structure howled as they were cast back into the warp. The corruption that had twisted metal and flesh into obscene shapes burned away, leaving only clean ash that dispersed into the void. Within 30 seconds, the ship was gone. Not destroyed, unmade, erased so thoroughly that even the atoms that had composed it no longer remembered being part of something so profane. The Emperor swayed, and for the first time since his arrival, he appeared genuinely weakened. Troy caught him as he stumbled, her empathic abilities registering exhaustion that measured in dimensions beyond mere physical tiredness. "It's done," he said quietly. "The ship is destroyed, the rift is sealed, and I have reinforced the dimensional barriers. Nothing else will follow from my universe. Your Federation is safe." "At what cost?" Picard asked, noting the way Revelation leaned on the counselor for support. "Merely time. I expended energy I had reserved for my return journey. The temporal window that would have allowed me to go home in 16 hours has now passed. I am—" He paused, and something that might have been wonder or might have been despair crossed his features. "I am stranded here, permanently." The bridge fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. The Emperor of Mankind, a being of godlike power from a universe of eternal war, was now a permanent resident of the Federation's reality. A tyrant seeking redemption, or a weapon waiting to be deployed, or perhaps something more complex than either label allowed. Picard helped Troy guide Revelation to the captain's chair, a gesture of respect that did not go unnoticed by the crew. The Emperor sat, looking around the bridge with new eyes, as if seeing it for the first time not as a visitor, but as someone who might have to call this universe home. "Captain Picard," Revelation said, finally, his voice carrying echoes of the authority he had wielded across 10,000 years, but tempered now with something new, humility, perhaps, or the beginnings of it. "I find myself in an unusual position. I am a ruler without an empire, a warrior without a war to fight, a tyrant stranded in a democracy. I do not know what I am meant to do here, in this gentler universe that has no need for what I am." Picard studied him for a long moment, then made a decision that he knew would either be remembered as his greatest wisdom or his greatest folly. "Then perhaps it's time for you to discover what you could be, rather than what you have been. The Federation could use someone with your knowledge, your experience, your power, not as a conqueror, but as a protector, not as an emperor, but as a citizen, if you're willing." A citizen. Revelation repeated the word, as if tasting a flavor he had never encountered. "I who have commanded billions, who have toppled civilizations and rebuilt them according to my vision, who have never bowed to any authority but my own, you ask me to become a citizen of your Federation? I ask you to become something you've never been before, someone who serves rather than commands, someone who protects rather than conquers, someone who learns rather than dictates." He paused, then added quietly, "Someone who gets to choose what humanity needs rather than deciding for them." The Emperor of Mankind sat in the captain's chair of a Starfleet vessel, surrounded by a crew that represented everything he had spent 10 millennia denying: diversity, democracy, peaceful coexistence with alien species. He looked at them, at their hope and fear and uncertainty, and felt something stir within him that he had thought long dead. Possibility. "Very well, Captain. I accept." He rose from the chair with visible effort and extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. "I will learn your Federation's ways. I will serve as you serve. And perhaps, in time, I will discover whether the tyrant can become something better, or whether he is too steeped in blood to ever be truly clean." Picard took his hand, feeling the immense power contained within that grip and the equally immense restraint required to make the gesture gentle. "Then welcome to the Federation," Picard said. "Not as Emperor, not as conqueror, but as one being among many, trying to build something better than what came before." The Emperor of Mankind stood on the bridge of the Enterprise, looking out at the stars of a universe that had never known his touch, had never been shaped by his will, had never needed him to survive. And for the first time in 40,000 years, he felt something he had thought lost forever. He felt hope. The months that followed the Emperor's stranding in the Star Trek universe became the subject of countless Starfleet reports, academic papers, and late-night debates in 10 Forward. Revelation, the name stuck, though everyone knew the truth of what he was, took to his new role with the intensity of someone who had spent 40 millennia learning that half measures led to extinction. He did not become a Starfleet officer. The very idea was absurd. Asking a being who had unified Terra through conquest to follow a chain of command would be like asking a sun to orbit a planet. Instead, the Federation created something unprecedented, an independent consultancy position that allowed him to operate with significant autonomy while remaining accountable to the Federation Council. His first assignment was analyzing the Borg threat. 7 weeks later, he delivered a comprehensive tactical assessment that fundamentally changed Starfleet's defensive strategies. His second was investigating unusual subspace phenomena near the Romulan neutral zone, which led to the discovery of a spatial rift that would have catastrophically destabilized within the decade. His third was mediating a conflict between the Klingon Empire and a newly discovered species that communicated through pheromones, a negotiation that required someone who could telepathically bridge the communication gap while commanding enough respect to prevent violence. He saved lives, thousands, then millions, then potentially billions, as his interventions prevented cascading disasters that would have reshaped the quadrant. But he did it the Federation way, or at least he tried. Every decision was reviewed, every action was debated, every use of his power required justification to beings who possessed a fraction of his knowledge and none of his experience. It frustrated him endlessly. It also slowly changed him. Captain Picard watched this transformation with the careful attention of someone who knew he was witnessing something unprecedented. The Emperor began asking questions rather than issuing pronouncements. He started prefacing his recommendations with "I suggest" instead of "you will." He learned to sit through committee meetings without psychically compelling everyone to simply accept his superior judgment. But perhaps most remarkably, he began to doubt.
Not doubt in his abilities, those remained absolute, but doubt in his certainty. Doubt in the assumption that he always knew best. Doubt in the philosophy that had guided him for 40,000 years. One evening, over a quiet drink in Picard's ready room, the Emperor said something that the captain would never forget. "In my universe, I was necessary. In yours, I am optional, and I find that I prefer being optional. There is a freedom in knowing that the universe does not require your tyranny to survive. A peace in understanding that sometimes the best thing a god can do is learn to be mortal." Picard raised his glass to mortality then, and to the choices we make when we're no longer bound by necessity. The Emperor, no longer quite the tyrant he had been, not yet the citizen he might become, touched his glass to Picard's. "To choices," he agreed. Outside the viewport, the stars shone with the promise of infinite possibilities. In one universe, an Imperium of 1,000,000 worlds burned beneath the weight of eternal war. In another, a tyrant learned that perhaps the greatest power was knowing when not to use it. And in the space between realities, the question hung eternal and unanswered. Was he wrong in his universe or right? The Emperor no longer knew. For the first time in 40,000 years, that uncertainty felt like hope.